I mean, I wanted to be an astronaut ever since I was actually as long as I can remember, far back as forever. So, um, yeah, I was that kind of kid that was constantly jumping off stuff, trying to fly. I actually got a football helmet for my fifth birthday because my parents got tired of the head injuries. I didn't play football, I just jumped off of everything. I hung out at the airport at clinging onto the chain link fence and watching the planes go. So it's what I really wanted to do forever. And that was great in first grade. In fact, everybody else that was my friend in first grade wanted to be an astronaut, and the adults were really good about it too. Yeah, like, sure, kid, go for it. But around sixth grade, maybe there was a five or six left. Everybody else wanted to be sports stars or movie picture people. And then by high school, by a senior year in high school, I was the only one left. And I remember really well the day I went in to see the guidance counselor, who I thought was going to tell me exactly how to become an astronaut. And so I was pretty pumped up to that. And I go in, and I'll never forget. She looks at this piece of paper and she says, "You want to be an astronaut?" And I was like, "Yep, that's what I'm going to do." She said, "Let me give you a little dose of reality here. You're not smart enough to be an astronaut." I was like, "What?" And she said, "And you're not athletic enough to be an astronaut." I was like, "Well, I can go to the gym." And then the last blow is, and frankly, you're not good looking enough to be an astronaut. So it was a sad day. But I didn't give up. I stopped telling people I wanted to do it because I realized after that most people thought it was a joke. But I started applying as soon as I met the minimum requirements, which was in my early 20s, and it took me 14 years of applications, but I finally got in. Yeah, well, I mean, your motivations change, but as a kid, it was all about flying and fire and smoke and going fast. And yeah, our whole family were big science fiction fans. So we read a lot of, space sci-fi, that sort of thing. And, but, as you get older, you sort of see a different perspective. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of it is about going fast and fire and smoke and floating in zero G. But there's also the parts that I guess, in some ways didn't even anticipate. The camaraderie of being on a team that works together, and that people will risk their life to save yours. I mean, that's a pretty powerful place to be. And also, one aspect of the job I didn't really quite get, but when I was young, but as I got older, it's a really interesting job because you have a very sort of intellectual side of it where you're studying circuitry and you're figuring out patterns of systems and that sort of thing. And then it's also a very physical job where you train for hours and hours underwater to do spacewalks, and you fly jet aircraft at high speed at in a precision kind of way. And so I really, really enjoyed this combination of kind of academics for half the day and then go, fly a jet or be underwater or, go in the zero G aircraft for, another half a day. So it's a really wonderful combination of activities. Yeah. So, well, after I heard that, I went off to college and all, and I was in college and I had to make a choice. I had a opportunity to go into the Air Force on a scholarship and become a pilot. But by that time, I'd been to an Air Force camp and I'd met a lot of pilots, and they were pretty negative on the job. They were telling me that they were only getting maybe 5 or 6 flight hours a month. The budgets were really tight, that they were doing a lot of make work because there wasn't enough flying time. And so they were not happy. And I wrote a letter to an astronaut saying that I had this opportunity to fly jets for the Air Force, or I could go stick with engineering, which is what I really liked. But my goal was to be an astronaut, and Ed Gibson was the guy I wrote to, and he wrote back this beautiful 3-page typewritten letter, basically saying, if what you want to do is fly airplanes, go fly airplanes. And if what you really want to do is engineering, then do that. Because about 5 years from now, the space shuttle is going to come online. And frankly, there's going to be 2 pilots for every 5 scientists flying. And so there's going to be opportunities on both sides. And he said, what you got to do is follow what you really love to do. And just that motivation will get you to be the best in the world, and that's what you need to be. And so I really took that to heart, and I gave up the whole Air Force thing. And that's when I started getting serious. And at that point, I decided that every day I would do something to get closer to becoming an astronaut. And so I literally went for, about 20 years where I would not go to sleep at night unless I'd done something that day to get closer to flying in space. And it might be simple stuff, read an article, write some software, propose an experiment, God knows what. But that's how I kept the dream alive, because I wouldn't spend even one day that I didn't do something to get closer to the dream. Well, I'll tell you, games that appeal to me are games that are easy to learn and hard to master. So my favorite game is Go. I've played Go since I was in college, right? And I'm still terrible at it in the global sense. but I've gotten to a point where, I can play reasonable. And, I can teach somebody to play Go in less than 5 minutes, and they have all the rules, and they can play a game, and we can actually, and one nice thing about Go is it's handicapable, so we can actually play a competitive game, as someone who's played Go for 40 years with someone who learned it 10 minutes ago. And I think that's a characteristic of a really, really good game. So one of the things actually that appeals to me, in some ways, about some of the later things that have come out in StarCraft is the effort that was put in to let people play the game who are not necessarily gamers, and yet maintain the extreme difficulty of becoming a master at the game. So I think that Blizzard as a company has done a really good job of that. So, and yeah, of course, I definitely see parallels between the idea of, deciding that this is something you want to invest time in, and then pursuing that all the way to the goal of mastering the game and whatever, winning championships or that sort of thing. I definitely think that kind of perseverance translates into the real world as someone who gets stuff done. I decided to take StarCraft with me when I went into space because of a number of reasons. One is that I really enjoyed the game, but I enjoyed a lot of games. The primary reason was because I saw StarCraft as something that helped me to stay in touch with my family when I was traveling. So I was away from home a lot as part of the astronaut job, but also partly because our family situation was that my wife was a professor, and so in Massachusetts. So I was commuting a lot between Houston and Massachusetts. And when you have kids, you want to stay connected every day. And StarCraft in particular stood out as a game that my son and I played for years as a way to just have fun together. And I really felt like that game brought us closer together as a family. And then, of course, obviously the space theme and all that stuff, it just fit. Yeah, yeah, we did both. And my daughter was more into Warcraft and StarCraft, but we all played. And well, we also play tennis, right? And so sometimes you play tennis against each other, and sometimes you play as doubles together. And we did the same thing in StarCraft. We also played the solo things together. So when we would be like on a weekend day or something, we would sit down and play the solo stuff and, run through a couple chapters just as something we would do for fun sitting in the same room. So we did it all. We played solo together, we played 1v1, we played teams. Yeah, I mean, all of it. I always found Protoss to be easier to play. So when I didn't play for a long time, I'd play Protoss, but then my son would beat me up with the siege tanks as Terran. And so I went back and forth. So obviously StarCraft is a game between, do you gather more resources or do you go on the attack? And you have to balance those two. One of the things I really enjoyed about it was the sneakiness, right? So you could cloak people and, get them in and fire off a nuke or something like that. And the idea of sort of, sending decoy troops out to get somebody to deploy in an area and then running around the end. I just thought those kind of different kind of war strategies were fascinating to play around with. So we did a lot of kind of exploration, if you will, as opposed to necessarily just straight out, okay, 1v1, let's just fight and play. And again, one of the nice things about StarCraft is you can have a very simplistic approach where you just bash each other's heads, or you can, as you go along and you learn how to play a little better, you can have more sophisticated, I guess, strategies within the game. So I like that, again, that issue of going from simple to complex. And the other thing is that Andy was born in 1985, so he was, when did they come out? Sort of mid-90s, right? So when we started playing StarCraft, he was pretty young. And as he grew up, you could watch his intellectual development sort of along with his StarCraft expertise. And, as a year later, I would compare a game that we'd saved, from a year earlier, and we'd be like, wow, look at how your sophistication has changed. So it was a way of actually watching my kids grow up. It's really kind of neat. Like you save photographs from when they were 5 and 10 and 15. Well, we saved StarCraft games. We go back and play the replays. Say, man, and just like you're embarrassed at your 16th birthday about your 6-year-old picture that your mother brings out, he'd be like, no, you have to get rid of that replay. I was so bad, Oh, I really liked it. I mean, it's not realistic in a sense, but it's every bit as good as the cinematic views for the most part. And really, StarCraft wasn't about the space depictions anyway. It was about the personal stories. It's Jim Raynor and Sarah Kerrigan, and how they're interacting with each other is, if you want to call it the culture of StarCraft to me. So, yeah, I mean, I think the graphics were pretty cool and the movies and all that, but I wouldn't say it was realistic. But, what science fiction necessarily is, right? Yeah, so some of the surprises that happen when you fly, there's a lot of them. I would say the biggest surprise I had on the first flight was the beauty of the Earth. And I was the photo TV guy for STS-72. So I'd spent a year working with photographers and looking at video and images of the Earth. And I thought I had a pretty good idea of what the Earth looked like. And when I floated up to that window for the first time, it's you know how you have memories that are embedded forever. Well, that's one of them. And the beauty of the Earth is so completely surpasses any imagery that we bring back. The depth of color, the green of the Amazon jungle and the tan of the Namibian desert and the white of the Himalayan snow, and the layers of blue in the atmosphere. I didn't even know, but there are at least 16 to 20 separate layers of blue when you look at the atmosphere. They actually are, you know, distinct layers, and they go all the way from the lightest sort of turquoise blue to the deepest, darkest midnight royal blue that you can possibly imagine. And film and digital imagery just doesn't have the dynamic range that it doesn't have the color range that your eyes have, and it also doesn't have the dynamic range. So you look at the white of the clouds against the complete black of space, and you can see that with your eye. I mean, you can resolve that, whereas cameras just either saturate in the black or in the white. So I can't bring back photography that shows you how beautiful the Earth is. It's just incredible. And so I spent a lot of hours doing that. And also another surprise was that I didn't have any clue where we were. We look out the window, and I'd studied all these pictures of the Earth for so long. No idea. I'd have to look at the computer to figure out where we were. And yet Brian Duffy, who was on his third flight, would look out the window and he'd go, oh, look, you know, there's the, you know, whatever province in China, or there's, you know, like I said, the Namibian desert. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. You must be cheating, right? Like, I thought he was just goofing me that he had looked at the computer first. And he goes, no. So you just look out the window for a few days and you'll know. And sure enough, about 3 days in, actually, the first thing I recognized was the Great Barrier Reef. I was like, wow, I know what that is. I know where we are. But after about 3 days, almost anywhere on the Earth, other than just the big blue ocean, I knew where we were. So I don't even know how that learning process happens, but somehow your brain figures it out. So the next thing that was pretty interesting, a little bit of a surprise, was learning to fly, right? So we had about a 30-foot long tunnel on my second flight that, as far as I was concerned, was the gun barrel and I was the bullet, right? So we fly down this thing, but when you do that on your first day, you're terrible. Then you bang into the walls and you smack your head in the bulkhead and you end up all bruised and cut up at the end of the day. But as the days go by, you can feel yourself getting better and better. And by be there a week, and you're flying like Superman. It's beautiful, and it's incredible. This sensation, it's like magic powers. Actually, we played Quidditch with no brooms. Yeah, we emptied out a cargo module and played Quidditch. We threw a snitch in there, and you try to grab it, and you shove somebody else away, and everybody goes flying. These kind of games are just, yeah, the sense of freedom and the magical feeling that you can fly is astounding. I think that training and simulations do a good job of preparing you for space, but I don't think that they feel a lot like weightlessness, except, of course, for the zero-G aircraft, which is exactly like weightlessness, but only for 30 seconds at a time. When you go underwater and become neutrally buoyant, the tasks that you do feel very similar to when you're in space doing those tasks. But when you're in the suit, you're very aware of gravity, and the suit has some buoyancy to it. Even though you're neutrally buoyant overall and you're floating in the middle of the water, the suit has a tendency to turn you in a direction that is mandated by where the air is in the suit. So, for example, if you turn upside down and you're working in the water upside down, it's very uncomfortable. The blood flows to your head and you have a lot of weight on your shoulders and you get bruises and that sort of thing. So you tend not to do that, and yet when you actually go do the task in space, of course, being upside down it's invisible, right? So, and when you push off a wall underwater, you go a little ways and you stop. But if you do that in space, you go and you go and you go until you push off another wall. So So the preparation is very good in terms of learning the tasks, but it's not good. In fact, there's negative training involved, particularly with the viscosity of the water, at teaching you what weightlessness is going to feel like. And I think the best example I have of that is getting your body oriented to do a task. So in the water, you would grab onto these handrails that were along the shuttle sill, and you grab them and you basically use your wrists to position your body. And it was hard work, and you do that for 6 or 8 hours, and your forearms are destroyed. And so you spend a couple years building up Popeye forearms, but that's not really the answer. You don't want to be forcing stuff. And about 2 weeks before my first flight, which had a spacewalk in it, a mentor, Story Musgrave, saw me at the copy machine, and he asked me, you got any question? I said, yes, Story, how the heck do you orient yourself, to do a task? And he goes, oh, you don't know about the digital tap. I'm like, the digital tap, what's that? So turns out what you actually do is you hold onto the handrail very lightly, and you reach about 6 inches above, and you tap on structure. And that causes your whole body to start to rotate at a fixed rate. And then you tap, when you want to be done, you reach 6 inches below, and you tap again, and you stop. And so you don't put arbitrary inputs in, you put quantal inputs in, and you practice before you go outside at getting good at being able to put in, one tap of a particular amount of force. And if you want to go twice as fast, you just tap twice. And it works beautifully. And that's something that just doesn't work at all underwater. And in fact, when I got on orbit, Story happened to be the Capcom. So I called down, I said, Story, so I said, EV2, Houston EV2, this digital tap thing works really well. And of course, there's a pause, and Story comes back and goes, we know, Dan. In terms of the relationship, though, to StarCraft, it's the simulations we do for launch and entry that they're really super, super video games, because you have 4 people in the shuttle cockpit simulator, in a motion-based simulator, and you have a big group of diabolical instructors who are trying to make you kill yourself and teach you in the process of how to become a team. So think about having 4 of you in a machine that has all of a perfect replica of the space shuttle cockpit with beautiful visuals, all mounted on hydraulic jacks, so that when you fire a jet, you feel the force from that jet. And you are now going to work together as a team, and you have a group of professional instructors who know all of these systems like the back of their hands. And you just go day after day after day, and you go in, and that's how you're learning to deal with, a computer failure at the same time as you have an electrical bus failure, at the same time as you have hydraulic system failure, at the same time that you have now another computer failure. Now 2 computers are saying one thing, and the other 2 computers are saying another thing. Which 2 do you believe? How do you switch over? How do you communicate so you're not crushing the comm? Just say things succinctly and only when they're really important and need to be said. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And the experience of having played video games is exactly what you want to prepare yourself to be in that environment. And I have to say, people ask me if I was scared to fly. And the answer is no. It's a dangerous thing to do, and I was scared to watch my friends fly. But when you're actually there, you're so excited, you're so ready. I was not scared to fly. And then people say, well, were you, in one of the movies, I think they say, were you scared that you were going to screw up? And the answer to that is that on the day, wasn't until my first flight, I didn't have a lot to do with launch. I was just a passenger. But when you get on the flight deck and the day comes that, you're going to be the flight engineer, I can honestly say that the training team brings you to a point where I looked at that seat and said, I am the best person in the world to do this job right now. There's nobody that's better at this than me. mean, 6 weeks ago, there was somebody who was better, and 6 weeks from now, there will be somebody who's better. But at this moment, there's nobody in the world that knows this job better. And so if I screw it up, anybody would have screwed it up. They bring you to a level of confidence that I hope that you have at some point in your life. This sense that, give me the ball, coach, because I can make this basket. I mean, you feel like you are the best in the world at something. That's a great feeling. Yeah, so the progression from StarCraft to StarCraft 2, well, StarCraft 2 was highly anticipated in our household. So, we waited a long time for it. I don't know if sort of the essence of the way that we played in terms of StarCraft versus StarCraft 2 wasn't much different, other than, as you say, the cooperative things. And in the intervening time, there were other games that came out that we had already been playing cooperatively. I think it was just a bigger universe and more varied things. And I think that the storyline was much more developed in StarCraft 2 than in StarCraft. The whole, Raynor, Kerrigan relationship was built up. And so some of the lore, I think, got really interesting. And of course, the level of gameplay was much more sophisticated. But the essence of why we play and how we play even, I think, didn't change between StarCraft and StarCraft 2. I would say the gameplay between the two, for me at least, as a not very good player, wasn't all that different. I think that my attraction to the Protoss was also that they were just kind of cool. You could, the way that things beamed in and that sort of stuff, I just liked that. And it also really depended on the mood of the day, right? I mean, if you're feeling kind of spacey and fanciful, that's Protoss. And if you're just feeling like you want to be Patton and grind through stuff, that's Terran, right? And if you want to be, Apocalypse Now, then you're Zerg. So one of the things I liked about them both is that about StarCraft was that you could sort of choose, my mood of the day and go with that. I think that the way that StarCraft 2 came out, where you were first Terran and then Zerg and then Protoss, was kind of neat in the sense that when the Terran one came out, you really polished up your Terran skills through the solo campaign. And then that was kind of a nice way, I think, what I was saying earlier in terms of starting easy and getting hard to master. Having just Terran to deal with in the first set was kind of instructional. So that by the time you got to the third, I was really, you're much, when the Protoss one comes out, you really feel like you already know how to play the Terran and the Zerg sides. So I thought that was a good learning process. So I've founded a robotics company and we're doing very well there. And certainly some of the things that came up in StarCraft come up when you build robots. So for example, there's the distinction between, say, remote controlling a robot versus having it do autonomous actions, which is completely analogous to driving your zealot around versus just telling him to go attack and then coming back and checking up on him now and then. And now that I think about it, that's actually a pretty good parallel to exactly what we do with the robots. We have levels of autonomy, and then as the tasks become more difficult for the robot, we have to intervene more and more often. So it's basically micromanagement versus overall strategy. And in some ways, now that you actually made me think about it, it might be interesting to take a look at some of the AI gaming engines as a way to automate some robotic tasks. Oh, that's an interesting idea. I might look into that. So I was in Japan. I was in Tokyo. And of course, we have there's a time lag there. He's in Boston. And so either he would have to get up early in the morning or I would. And so we would find times to play nevertheless. So it was early morning, I think, in Boston, and late in mid-evening in Tokyo, and we're playing this cooperative game, and we're doing great. I mean, we're really doing well. And I'll never forget him. He's like, "Dad, I got to go to school," because it was, I don't know, 7 o'clock in the morning, right? I'm like, "Forget school. We gotta beat this thing." And he's like, "Okay." So we're playing along, and then I start getting messages from my wife, who's like, "What are you doing?" I say, "Oh, come on, we're right in the middle of this game." She's like, "He's got to go to school." And so I wrote to her, I said, "Look, look over his shoulder and watch how much thinking he's doing as we, attack this last encampment. And if you think that he's going to learn more by going to school now, then I'll shut it down and let's send him to school. But if you think he's going to learn more by figuring out how to beat up on these Zerg, then let us finish it, and he'll just go to school late today." So she does, and she writes back and she goes, "You're right." So we played for a couple more hours, and he was late for school. But sometimes you gotta, this is a big thing for me in school. You gotta find ways to get kids to love to learn. It's not about teaching them how to multiply two numbers. It's teaching them how to want to multiply two numbers so they can go solve some puzzle that they need to get solved. And man, StarCraft does that in spades, right? It's an intellectual game. And this idea of deep thinking and strategizing, I think a lot of people think of video games as just rapid hand movements. And that's where they're wrong. And I really felt like that day, he was going to learn 10,000 times more by figuring out this puzzle, this problem, than he would by, going and learning, multiplication tables or something. And that's not to disparage, early math. It's just to say that the motivation for doing academic things for me, and I think for my kids and for my wife, is that it's puzzle solving. You want to solve this puzzle, and you can't solve it because you don't have the tools you need to solve it. So you go to school and you learn the tools, and then you can come back and solve your puzzle. And that's the point. And so, yeah, so that was a great day. I mean, I think that's a philosophy that I've had for a long time, that, do what you need to do right now to get better at what you want to get better at. And it's a good motivator for academic achievement. Yeah, so the close of the story is a little sad, just like when you read a series of novels and they finally end, or for that matter, actually, my wife and I just went through the 8 Harry Potter movies over the last week, and they're over, and you're kind of like, oh man. But at the same time, it's good to see all the threads finished. And there's a satisfaction in having an outcome, and I think it ended on a very high note, which is exactly what you want, right? You don't want it to be to the point where, well, I don't really care what happened. We're on our 32nd episode and it just doesn't matter anymore. So actually, I liked the way it ended, and while I was sad to not have more storyline and more solo things to pursue. There's always something new down the horizon. So actually, I like the idea of ending on a high note, and I think that's exactly what StarCraft II did. So in terms of going to Mars, colonizing Mars, that sort of thing, I mean, when I was growing up, I thought that's what would be my job as an astronaut. We'd done the moon. I figured I'd have my boots on Mars. So it seems like that's a goal that's always 20 years in the future. But it's really a political question more than a technical question. I think that we could go to Mars today. We have the technology, we have the rockets to do it, or at least the knowledge to build the rockets to do it, and certainly the technology to survive on the, in the caves and that sort of stuff. So it's more a political will question, I think, in terms of the ability to do it. I think another question is why. There's a lot of people that say, well, we can just send robots. If it's about science, just send the robots. And then other people say, well, the robots are not capable. And there's this back and forth. And I think it's a specious argument, because if what you want is, a rock from Mars, yeah, send a robot and bring back a rock from Mars. I mean, that's probably the way to go. But I don't think that's the point of going to Mars. I think there's two reasons to go to Mars. The first reason is because if we go to Mars and we find any evidence, actually any definitive evidence, that there was life on Mars, and that life was fundamentally different than life on Earth, which means that it didn't, say, use DNA or RNA, or the amino acids are fundamentally different, something that demonstrates that life arose independently on Mars, so that we know that it arose independently in two different places, Earth and Mars. That answers the question. If it happened twice, then it's all over the galaxy, and ET's out there, and we just aren't listening properly. And we've answered the question. We're not alone. On the flip side, if we go to Mars and we don't find life, none, zip, sterile, and we verify what we think is true, which was that many millions of years ago, Mars was warm and wet for a very long time, conducive to life, but it seems that it never arose, then, you have to wonder, maybe life really is, it seems inconceivable, but maybe we are it. We're going to go to the rest of the galaxy. Jim Kirk will be born one day. That's the reason to go to Mars. That's the reason to have an independent colony, and that's the reason robots don't cut it. One thing we didn't talk about was when I visited Blizzard. In fact, Andy and I both went out, and you have a little museum there that had the disc that I flew, along with a lot of other artifacts. And then just walking the halls of Blizzard is an experience. I mean, there's all these models of creatures that you have seen on the screen but never seen in real life, right? And meeting the people was wonderful. I had no idea the depth of the artistry and the sound and the music and the composition and the storyboards and the history stuff and the type of the depth of the people that we met at Blizzard was astounding. Just talking to the artists and seeing the storyboards and seeing how the creatures and characters were developed, and then going in and listening to some of the early, music and cinematography, and then visiting people's desks and having, people on their shelves have all these, just this wide variety of Warcraft and Starcraft and other game implements and tools, and when you've been there long enough, you get a sword, right? You get a shield, and then you get a sword. There are people with suits of armor in their office, and then of course, we went to play the games, right? And this big network of games, and you're playing Starcraft against the guy who produced the game. That was very cool. And the big sculpture that's out in the courtyard, and then you go to lunch in the cafeteria, and you're talking to people who are passionate about what they do. And I would say, in wrapping up, that the thing that was best about being at NASA was that I was surrounded by people who shared my passion for spaceflight deeply, spent their lives thinking about it, and being surrounded by those people, the thing that you care most about in the world is the topic of conversation all day long. And there's an army of people who support and prepare you to fly in space. That's the best thing about being at NASA, is being immersed in this group of people that share your passion. And I have to say, I saw that at Blizzard. This was a place where you could feel the passion. I went and understood why these games are so good. It's because the people who make them aren't doing a 9-to-5 job. They are doing what they are passionate about. And they deeply care that the games play well and look good and are balanced and that people have a positive experience for them. They understand that this is not just, I don't know, it's just not another job. It's a calling. And that comes across crystal clear when you get to meet the people. And so I really enjoyed that visit. Yeah, so I decided to take it into space without saying anything to Blizzard. It's just something I wanted to do. So when I decided, it was more a family decision. Like, we were picking what CDs to fly for music. And then, I don't even know, so one of us said, well, let's fly a StarCraft CD. I was like, that's a great idea. So I just did it. And then after I brought it home, I was kind of like, well, what do? You have a lot of stuff. I thought, well, maybe Blizzard would like to have it back. And so I don't even remember how I just wrote some email note or something to Blizzard and said, by the way, I flew this thing in space and, would you have an interest in it? And I got a pretty positive response back.